When I found the hidden camera in my bathroom, my stepson said, "I need to make sure you're not doing drugs." I was cleaning the bathroom vent when I found the tiny camera pointed directly at the shower, and my hands started shaking because I knew exactly who put it there. "Jason, get in here now." My 19-year-old stepson walked in casually like I'd called him for dinner, not about a hidden camera in my private bathroom. "What's up?" He saw the camera in my hand and shrugged. "Oh, you found it. I've been meaning to check the battery on that." He said it like it was completely normal to put surveillance equipment in his stepmother's bathroom. "You've been recording me?" My voice was shaking with rage, but he just rolled his eyes. "Not you specifically. I'm monitoring the bathroom for evidence of drug use. Dad said you've been acting weird lately. Tired all the time. Moody. Classic signs of substance abuse." I stared at him in disbelief. "I'm tired because I work 12-hour shifts as a nurse." "I'm moody because you've been violating my privacy." He pulled out his phone and showed me an app. "I have cameras in your car too, and your office, and one in your bedroom, but that one's just audio to hear if you're making suspicious phone calls." My stomach dropped. "You've been watching me everywhere? Listening to me sleep?" He nodded proudly. "For 3 months. Dad gave me permission to investigate you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Your father knew about this?" Jason smiled and it was cold. "He bought the cameras. He said after his first wife cheated, he couldn't go through that again, so I'm helping him make sure you're trustworthy." His first wife was Jason's mother, who hadn't cheated but had left because Jason had exhibited disturbing behavior she'd wanted to get him help for. "This is illegal. It's stalking." But Jason laughed. "It's not stalking. It's protection. Dad needs to know what kind of person he married." He pulled up more footage on his phone. "Like, here's you crying in your car after work. Why would you sit in the garage crying unless you were guilty about something?" That was the day I'd lost a patient, but I didn't owe him an explanation. "Or here's you on the phone with someone named Frank." "Who's Frank?" "Dad's name is Robert." Frank was my brother, but Jason had already decided I was guilty. "I'm calling your father right now." But Jason grabbed my phone. "He already knows. I send him daily reports. He said to keep monitoring until we find something concrete." I walked past him to find Robert, who was in his home office. "You had Jason put cameras in my bathroom?" Robert didn't even look up from his computer. "Jason's good with technology. He's just making sure you're who you say you are." I held up the camera. This was in the shower. "He's been recording me naked." Robert finally looked at me. He's not interested in that. He's looking for track marks, drug residue, suspicious behavior. I felt like I was going insane. This is sick. "He follows me to work. He tracks my phone. He goes through my mail." Robert sighed like I was being dramatic. "His mother abandoned him. He has trust issues. The therapist said to let him work through them." I knew that was a lie because Jason had refused therapy. "What therapist? You told me he wouldn't go." Robert's face changed. "Fine. There's no therapist, but he's protecting our family. After what his mother did to us, we can't be too careful." Jason appeared in the doorway. "I also installed software on her laptop. She's been looking at apartment listings. She's planning to leave you, Dad." I had been looking at apartments because living with someone watching my every move was unbearable. "Because you're stalking me." Jason stepped closer. "See, Dad? She's getting defensive. People with nothing to hide don't get angry about security measures." He showed Robert his phone. "Look at this. She went to a lawyer's office last week. Stayed for an hour. I had gone to a lawyer about getting a restraining order, but hadn't filed yet. She's planning something, Dad. Maybe she wants your money. Maybe she's already got another man lined up." Robert stood up and put his hand on Jason's shoulder. "Good work, son. Keep monitoring." That's when I realized they were both insane. I walked out of Robert's office and went straight to our bedroom, locking the door behind me even though I knew Jason probably had cameras in here too. My hands were still shaking as I pulled out my phone and called my brother Frank, the one Jason was so suspicious about. When he answered, I whispered that I needed help getting out of here. Frank asked if I was safe right now, and I told him yes, but I didn't know for how long. I explained everything about the cameras and Robert's complete support of Jason's surveillance, how they were working together to monitor my every move. Frank told me not to pack anything or do anything that might alert them, just act normal while he figured out how to help me safely leave this nightmare. He said he would call me back tomorrow with a plan and to be careful until then. The next morning I went to work like everything was fine, but my coworker Selena Ramos noticed I was jumpy and distracted during our shift. I kept checking my phone and looking over my shoulder, and when she asked if I was okay, I broke down in the supply closet. I told her everything about the cameras in my bathroom and car and bedroom, about Jason following me and tracking my location, about Robert defending it all as protection. Selena grabbed my hands and said that was crazy, that what they were doing was illegal and dangerous. She immediately offered to let me stay at her place if I needed to get out quickly, and I almost cried at having someone actually believe me instead of telling me I was overreacting. During my lunch break, I met with attorney Rajesh Newell that Frank had found for me. His office was downtown in a building with security cameras in the lobby, which made me paranoid that Jason might somehow access those too. Rajesh explained that what Jason and Robert did was illegal surveillance, and I had grounds for restraining orders against both of them. He said I needed to document everything, copies of the camera footage if possible, and plan my exit carefully, because these situations can become dangerous when the abuser realizes they're losing control. He asked if I felt physically safe at home, and I said yes for now, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. Rajesh gave me his cell number and told me to call immediately if anything escalated, and he started preparing paperwork for the restraining orders. I spent the next 3 days pretending everything was normal while secretly photographing every camera location I could find. I found 2 more in the garage and 1 in the laundry room that I hadn't noticed before. I wrote down dates and times Jason had followed me to work, to the grocery store, to the gym. I forwarded important documents to Frank's email address, things like my birth certificate and nursing license and bank statements. Jason watched me constantly, but I forced myself to act like the defeated wife who had accepted the surveillance, which seemed to satisfy him for now. At dinner, I asked him about his classes and Robert about his work, playing the role of the obedient wife who had learned her lesson. Omar Ramos, the hospital security guard who was Selena's husband, offered to help me document the cameras in my car during my shift without Jason knowing. We went out to the employee parking lot during my break, and Omar crawled under my car with a flashlight. He found 3 devices hidden in my vehicle and photographed them with timestamps, giving me evidence that proved the extent of the surveillance I was experiencing. One was attached to the undercarriage near the back wheel, another was behind the front bumper, and the third was tucked inside the wheel well. Omar said these were professional-grade tracking devices, not cheap ones you buy online, which meant Robert had spent serious money on this surveillance system. Robert confronted me that evening about seeming distant, and demanded to know if I was planning something. His paranoia was showing through his attempt at concern, his eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. I told him I was just exhausted from work, and the stress of feeling watched all the time, which made him defensive and angry. He said I was still complaining about Jason trying to protect our family, that I should be grateful they cared enough to keep me safe. I wanted to scream that monitoring someone in the shower wasn't protection, but I kept my face neutral and apologized for being difficult. Robert seemed satisfied with my submission, and went back to his office, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my racing heart. Jason cornered me the next morning in the kitchen and showed me his phone with real-time tracking of my location. He casually mentioned he had noticed I sat in the hospital parking lot for 15 minutes yesterday, asking what I was doing. I realized that was when I met with the attorney, and my blood ran cold wondering if he somehow knew. I told him I was just taking a break before my shift, eating a granola bar in my car because I'd skipped breakfast. Jason stared at me for a long moment and then smirked, walking away like he had proven some point about monitoring me. I stood there gripping the counter until my hands stopped shaking, knowing I had to get out soon before they discovered what I was really planning. Frank called that afternoon with a plan. He had rented a small apartment in my name across town, set up a new bank account Jason couldn't access, and arranged for movers to get my essential belongings out, while Robert and Jason were both away next week. Robert had a business meeting 2 hours away on Tuesday, and Jason had classes all day, giving me a window to escape. I was scared, but also relieved that someone was helping me escape this insanity, instead of telling me I was overreacting. Frank said he would be there with the movers, and we would work quickly to get everything out before either of them got home. He reminded me not to pack anything obvious, not to change my behavior at all until the day I left. I met with Rajesh Newell again, and he had prepared restraining order paperwork for both Jason and Robert. He explained that the surveillance constituted stalking and harassment under state law, and once I was out safely, we would file everything at once so they couldn't interfere with my leaving, or try to intimidate me into coming back. The paperwork detailed every camera location, every instance of following me, every violation of my privacy over the past 3 months. Rajesh said the evidence Omar had photographed and the documentation I had gathered was strong, and a judge would almost certainly grant the restraining orders. He asked if I had somewhere safe to stay, and I told him about the apartment Frank had rented, and he nodded approvingly, saying that was smart planning. I walked back to my car after my shift ended and tried to act normal, even though my whole body felt tense from keeping up the pretense that everything was fine. Selena caught up with me in the parking lot and grabbed my arm gently, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the bruise that had formed there. She asked if Robert or Jason hurt me, and I could hear the concern in her voice mixed with something harder, like she was ready to do something about it if I said yes. I explained it was from yesterday when I helped transfer a patient who was heavier than expected, and the bruise was from where his weight shifted suddenly against my arm. She studied my face for a long moment like she was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then she squeezed my hand and told me her spare bedroom was ready anytime I needed it, day or night, no questions asked. Having that backup plan made me feel less trapped, even though I was already planning to move into the apartment Frank had arranged, knowing I had multiple escape routes if something went wrong with my main plan. I drove home thinking about how Selena had offered without making me feel weak or stupid for staying this long, just giving me options and letting me know I had people on my side. That night at dinner, Jason announced he was installing more cameras in the garage and laundry room for complete coverage of the house. Robert nodded like this was perfectly reasonable home security instead of the sick surveillance it actually was. Jason explained that the garage was a blind spot where I could potentially meet someone or hide things, and the laundry room was where people often disposed of evidence by washing it away. I sat there eating my food and pretending this was normal dinner conversation, while inside I was screaming at how far they had taken this insanity. Robert asked Jason how long the installation would take, and Jason said he could have it done by the weekend. Maybe add one in the kitchen too, since that was where I spent time alone in the mornings before work. I realized there was no limit to how far they would take this surveillance. No point where Robert would say this was too much or Jason had gone too far. They were feeding off each other's paranoia and suspicion, building this prison around me one camera at a time. I was getting out just in time before it got even worse, before they decided to put cameras in every room or follow me to work every single day. The next morning before my shift, I carefully packed a bag with my birth certificate, social security card, passport, and the copies of all the camera evidence I had gathered. I added my medications, one change of clothes, underwear, and my phone charger, keeping everything small enough to fit in my work locker where Jason couldn't find it. I drove to the hospital with the bag hidden under my passenger seat, my heart beating fast every time I checked my mirror to see if Jason was following me. At work, I stuffed everything into my locker and locked it, feeling like I had just completed the first real step toward freedom. Every night that week, I came home expecting Jason to confront me about something, to tell me he had seen me packing or noticed something missing. He seemed satisfied that his monitoring was keeping me in line and preventing whatever imaginary thing he was convinced would happen, like as long as he could watch me, I couldn't betray his father. I played the role of the defeated wife who had accepted the surveillance, moving through the house like I had given up fighting, and it seemed to work because both of them relaxed a little. Robert came into our bedroom one night and started touching me in a way that meant he wanted to be close, and I felt my whole body go rigid knowing Jason had audio recording running in this room. I couldn't go through with it and I pulled away, which made Robert angry in that cold, quiet way that was somehow worse than yelling. He accused me of holding back love as punishment for the cameras, like I was being petty and vindictive instead of violated. I told him I couldn't be close to him knowing his son was listening to us, that it made my skin crawl to think about Jason reviewing recordings of our private moments. Robert called me paranoid and said Jason would never actually listen to those recordings. They were just there for security purposes in case I made suspicious phone calls. I asked him how that made it any better, how it was okay that the recordings existed at all, and he said I was being dramatic like always. The fight went on for an hour with him getting angrier and me getting more disgusted, until finally he stormed out and slept in the guest room. I lay there in the dark thinking about how he was chosen his disturbed son over his wife, how he would rather let Jason monitor our bedroom than admit this whole thing was sick. My phone buzzed the next afternoon with a text from Frank saying everything was ready for Tuesday. Robert had a business meeting 2 hours away that would keep him gone most of the day, and Jason had classes from 9 until 4. I confirmed that I was working a day shift that ended at 3, which gave me time to meet the movers and get my important stuff out before either of them got home. Frank said he would be there with the movers to help load everything quickly and make sure I got out safely. I felt my hands shaking as I typed back my confirmation, knowing that in less than a week I would be free from their surveillance and control. The rest of my shift I kept checking my phone to make sure the plan was still in place, that nothing had changed. Tuesday was really going to happen. Jason showed up at the hospital 2 days later without any warning, walking into the building like he had every right to be there. He found me at the nurse's station and said he was in the area and thought he would bring me coffee, holding out a cup from the place I usually went to. I knew he was checking on me because his tracking showed I had been at work all day without going anywhere, and he wanted to see what I was actually doing with my time. Selena appeared from the other side of the station and stepped between us, telling Jason in her firm nurse voice that family visits needed to be arranged in advance, and he needed to leave. Jason tried to argue that he was just bringing his stepmother coffee, but Selena didn't back down and told him hospital policy was clear, and he needed to go. I used that moment to slip away into a patient room, hiding there until Selena texted me that he had finally left the building. My whole body was shaking when I came out and Selena hugged me, saying she knew something was wrong and she wasn't going to let him corner me at work. That evening, I drove to Selena's house with copies of my car keys, credit cards, and all my important documents in a folder. She let me store everything in her spare bedroom closet where Jason couldn't possibly find it, giving me another layer of protection in case he somehow discovered my hospital locker or searched my car. I told her about Tuesday's plan and she made me promise to text her the moment I was safely in the new apartment. Rajesh had already filed the papers for the restraining orders to be served right after I got out, and Frank had arranged for the locks on my new apartment to be changed the same day I moved in. Every piece was falling into place and I felt like maybe I could actually do this, actually escape without them stopping me or hurting me. Robert announced at dinner that he was taking Jason out the next night to celebrate him getting accepted into some tech program. They were both excited about it, and I realized they were bonding over their shared need to control and monitor. Like Jason's acceptance proved he was smart and capable instead of disturbed. After they left for dinner, I moved fast through the bedroom, checking every spot I could think of for hidden cameras. I found 2 more devices I hadn't noticed before, one tucked behind a picture frame and another inside a decorative box on the dresser. I photographed both with my phone, making sure to get clear shots that showed exactly where they were hidden and how small they were. My stomach turned thinking about how thoroughly they had invaded my privacy. How many hours of footage existed of me in my most private moments. I put everything back exactly how it was, and went downstairs, feeling sick, but also relieved that I had more evidence to show the police and the judge. The night before I was supposed to leave, I lay in bed fully dressed with my phone in my hand, and the ringer turned on high. Jason knocked on my door at midnight and asked through the wood if I was really sleeping, saying his audio monitoring picked up sounds that seemed like I was awake. I called out in a sleepy voice that I was sleeping, and he needed to let me rest because I had work in the morning. He stood outside my door for 5 full minutes, and I could see his shadow under the door, could hear him breathing on the other side. My hand was wrapped around my phone, ready to call the police if he tried to come in, my whole body tense and waiting. Finally, he walked away, and I heard his footsteps going down the hall to his room. I stayed awake the rest of the night, too scared to move or make any sound that might bring him back. Tuesday morning, I got up and went to work exactly like I did every other day, but my hands shook through my entire shift. I dropped supplies twice and had to redo an IV because I couldn't get my fingers steady enough to insert it properly. Selena squeezed my shoulder during shift change and whispered that I had this, that in a few hours I would be free. I held on to those words as I finished my last patient check and gathered my things from my locker, the go bag heavy in my hands. I walked out to my car at 3 and drove toward the house, counting down the minutes until the movers would arrive and I could finally leave Robert and Jason forever. The movers pulled up right at 3:30 and I met them at the door with my list of everything that was mine. 2 guys in blue shirts started loading boxes from the bedroom while I pointed out which furniture to take and which to leave. My hands shook as I taped up the last box of clothes, knowing every minute counted before Jason or Robert came home. The older mover asked if I was okay, and I told him I was leaving a bad situation, that we needed to work fast. He nodded and got his partner moving quicker, both of them carrying my dresser down the stairs while I grabbed armfuls of shoes from the closet. I left behind the expensive jewelry Robert bought me, the designer purses, anything that might give them an excuse to claim I stole from them. My nursing textbooks went into a box, my grandmother's quilt, the photo albums from before I met Robert. Everything that was truly mine fit into their truck within 40 minutes, which felt both sad and freeing at the same time. I was carrying the last box of kitchen items I'd brought into the marriage when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. My stomach dropped as I looked out the window and saw Jason's silver sedan parked behind the moving truck, blocking it in. He got out with his phone already raised, recording as he walked toward the house. The movers were loading my box into the truck when Jason started yelling that I was stealing his father's property, that he was calling the police on me right now. The older mover set down the box and calmly explained they were only moving items I legally owned, that I had documentation for everything. Jason shoved his phone closer to the mover's face and demanded to see the paperwork, his voice getting louder and angrier. I came outside with my folder of receipts and photos showing what I'd owned before the marriage, but Jason snatched it from my hands. He flipped through the pages while blocking the truck's path, saying none of this proved anything, that I was abandoning his father and stealing their belongings. The younger mover pulled out his own phone and started recording Jason, saying they had a right to leave and he needed to move his car. Jason called Robert's number while standing in front of the truck, telling him to get home immediately because I was leaving and taking everything. I could hear Robert's voice shouting through the phone from where I stood 10 feet away. The older mover looked at me and asked quietly if I wanted them to call the police. I nodded and he dialed while Jason paced in the driveway, still recording everything and yelling into his phone. The police arrived in 2 patrol cars within 10 minutes, and I showed them my documentation, while Jason showed them his phone footage of me packing. The first officer looked through my receipts and photos, then asked Jason to show proof that any of the items in the truck belonged to him or his father. Jason couldn't produce anything except his recordings of me loading my own belongings. The second officer told Jason he needed to move his car immediately, or he'd be arrested for obstruction. Jason argued that I was stealing, that his father would confirm it when he arrived, but the officer repeated that he had 60 seconds to move the vehicle. Jason finally got in his car and backed up, but he parked on the street and kept recording everything. The movers finished loading quickly while both officers stood watching to make sure Jason didn't try to block them again. I was climbing into my car when Robert's truck came speeding up the street and screeched to a stop in the driveway. He jumped out screaming about abandonment and betrayal, running toward the moving truck that was already pulling away. I started my engine as Robert pounded on my window, his face red and twisted with rage. He yelled that I couldn't leave, that we were married, that I was throwing away our family over nothing. The officer who'd stayed behind stepped between us and told Robert to back away from my vehicle. I saw Jason trying to follow the moving truck in his car, but the other patrol car blocked him while I pulled out onto the street. My hands were shaking, so hard I could barely steer as I followed the movers toward my new apartment across town. Robert's screaming faded behind me as I turned onto the main road, leaving that house and that nightmare behind forever. The drive took 30 minutes and I kept checking my mirrors to make sure neither Robert nor Jason had found a way to follow me. Frank was waiting outside the apartment building when I arrived and he hugged me tight while the movers started unloading. A locksmith van was already parked in front, and the guy was waiting with his toolbox to change all the locks. The apartment was small, but it was mine, with no cameras and no one watching my every move. Frank helped carry boxes while the movers brought up my furniture, and the locksmith installed new deadbolts on both the front door and the sliding door to the tiny balcony. My phone rang and I saw Rajesh's name on the screen. He told me the restraining orders were being served to both Robert and Jason right now, that they couldn't come within 500 feet of my home or my workplace. I thanked him and hung up, then sat down on my couch in my new living room and started crying. The movers finished unloading and left. Frank paid them and the locksmith, and then it was just the two of us in my new apartment. Frank made me eat some pizza he'd ordered while I unpacked essentials, telling me I was safe now and they couldn't get to me anymore. That night, I lay in my new bed with the door triple locked and my phone on the nightstand next to me. Every sound made me jump. Every car door outside had me checking the window to make sure it wasn't Robert or Jason finding me. But underneath the fear was something I hadn't felt in months. A tiny seed of safety growing in my chest. Frank called at 10 to check on me and I cried again, telling him I couldn't believe I actually got out. He reminded me about the restraining orders, about the new locks, about how they couldn't watch me anymore. I fell asleep with my phone in my hand, jumping awake twice during the night at sounds that turned out to be nothing. The next morning I went to work early, and Danielle called me into her office before my shift started. She explained that Jason had tried to access the hospital yesterday claiming to be my emergency contact, but security had turned him away. She'd already flagged both Robert and Jason in the hospital system, and if either of them showed up, security would remove them immediately. She'd also arranged for me to park in the secure employee garage from now on, instead of the regular lot. I thanked her and she squeezed my hand, telling me she was glad I got out safely. That afternoon, I met with Rajesh at his office to review the restraining orders. He showed me the signed documents prohibiting Robert and Jason from contacting me or coming near my home or workplace. He explained that Robert's attorney had already called trying to negotiate, wanting me to agree to a meeting. I told Rajesh I wasn't interested in talking to Robert until he got serious therapy for his paranoia, and Jason got the psychological help his mother had tried to get him years ago. Rajesh nodded and said he'd communicate that to Robert's attorney. I walked out of his office feeling lighter than I had in months, knowing I was finally free from their surveillance nightmare and starting to rebuild my life with Frank, Selena, and the legal protections keeping them away from me.